Hello guys, good morning. Welcome to our channel once again. Today we are going to be creating the video for the fire station environments project that I talked about in the last video for the um, air conditioner we had. If you've not seen that video, you can check it over here. The link should be on the screen. I'm going to also paste it in the description of the video. So like usual, we're going to first of all show you my projects that we're working on the fire station environment. We not so much is going on right now. We just got the building and a few placeholders for the environment props. But yeah, this is where our generator we are going to be creating today is going to be located. So first I'm going to run it through an AI, as I said I'm exploring in the last video how to integrate AI with 3D modeling. And like I said last time, the best way I found is to use it to generate a kind of blockout from the image that we are going to be working. What I have on the screen right here is a test that I made a few days ago on this generator. So I'm gonna be doing it from scratch today though. So yeah, first off we're gonna open a new workstation, select the image we're gonna be working on, run it through the AI after running through a few settings, that is. Okay, so our image is available to us right now. That took a few minutes. As you can see, it's well, based on the options we give it to generate in parts and sections, and yeah, the mesh is not really clean, so we'll have to work on it once we get into Blender, which is, as you can see, one of the few limitations of AI. So if you ever thought that AI could give you perfectly game-ready meshes and stuff like that, well, I don't think it's there quite yet. It's still, yeah, it's still on its way. So the best thing we can do right now is to get familiar with it, at least in my opinion, to get familiar with the software and the tools, just so that no matter what happens tomorrow in the future, we are going to be at least one step ahead of it. So yeah, I'm going to rename it and I'm going to get a reference into my scene. That's a human reference, so I just know how big it is. I advise you to do that at the start of your project. I started this project in Unreal Engine, and that's where all my human scale references are, not in here. So that's the reason they're not here. So I'm gonna have to import a new one into the engine or into the software so I can get a feel for how big this is. And as you can see, it's way smaller than it's expected to be. So I'm gonna have to do a few adjustments in terms of the dimension of this asset scale. Open my documentation, and as you can see, I have a list of things I'm working on, what they are meant to look like and stuff. So it's kind of like a good thing to do. It gives you a clear idea of what you need in your scene, and yeah, it's like it kind of like grounds the environment. You don't end up doing over or getting carried away and just keep adding stuff and stuff and stuff. Because believe me, I've been there. You end up not completing that project. Yeah, you won't end up completing that project. So having a documentation makes things a little bit easy on the eyes and on the head. So once I got the dimensions I needed, I put them down into my documentation, closed the web page, and went back into Blender and began working from there. So I first of all created a new cube, set it to the dimensions I had, and that's acted as my guide mesh that I used to kind of like encapsulate the prop. So that would have told me at least what dimensions the assets would have had or should have when it's inside the scene. And I'm going to scale the prop reference that we have there as a base 3D mesh that we have there to fit the dimensions of this guide mesh. Now once we have that, I'm going to extract something. I'm going to extract a duplicate of the guide mesh, and then that's going to turn out to be my starting point from which I'm going to use to model these 3D assets. So if you really want to stick through it and see how we go through this to the end, I will invite you to stay tuned and watch the next video guys going to be uploaded. So subscribe to the channel, hit the notification button, and a new video should be out in a few hours. I'll see you guys in the next one. Okay, while we go forward with the modeling process of this generator, I just want to make something clear. Though I used AI to generate a base mesh, or as I like to call it, a guide mesh for this um, modeling process we are having here, or this industrial generator, I still make heavy use of my mood board, where I have all the references I'm using for this image. Although I'm focusing mainly on one particular reference I have there, but I still make heavy use of that mood board, regardless of the fact that yeah, I have this AI generated mesh for me. So I'm using the mesh as just a guide and nothing else. So what I'm doing here is that I'm going to break up the mesh into two parts, the top and the bottom part of this generator model. And then I'm going to start modeling each of them individually to get my base shape or the silhouette of the assets. And you're going to see me doing a lot of cutting with a knife tool in Blender and joining together during this process. Now, one of the advantages that I'm using AI to generate a base mesh gave me when I started this project was the fact that I didn't have to guess things. I didn't have to guess how large something should look like. I didn't have to guess how small something should look like. I didn't have to guess how high should I place some other things and how low should I place some other things. I didn't have to guess how high is too high and how low is too low because I already had a base mesh that was generated for me by the AI. So it took away all of the guess a lot of the guesswork, not all of them, but quite a lot of it, and just left me to make my own artistic decisions without having to worry about too many complications. Okay, so once I was done working on the base mesh for this asset, then it was down to the medium details. Okay, so at this point when I'm working on the medium details, that's when I begin to do a lot of inserts and cutting and joining. By cutting and joining, what I basically mean is that if you've ever worked on 3D models like this, where you have a an extrusion in the middle of a plane surface, you would agree with me that when you extrude like that and then you have to add things like bevels, when it comes to the point where you have to work on the low poly mesh, working with those bevels become a bit of an annoyance. So I didn't want to have to go through that stress. So my intention was that I was going to cut a hole basically into that plane shape and detach the extrusion or whatever formed that extrusion from the rest of the mesh so that I could just keep it on top of the surface as a separate piece without it having to interfere with the other parts of the mesh. That way, when it came to creating a low poly, it won't be too much of a problem for me. So the mid stage was mainly focused on me creating all these other mid details, which truly can be baked in, but I didn't want to bake them in since I wanted them to have a, well, not wanting them to have a sense of realism, more like game engines are strong enough these days to handle a large amount of polygons. So I felt keeping them available would have been the best choice in this case. Yeah. Now again, once I got to this point and I had um, an inserted or an extruded detail that I was satisfied with. What I basically did was that I just cut them away from the rest of the mesh and sealed up the space it's occupied at the back there so that it was standing on its own. Um, then I had another thought or a change of mind and was like, well, if I seal up the back where it was occupying before, it's just going to be um, an empty space there that's just not going to be seen. We'll be wasting UV space basically that we could use to fixing some other textures. So I was like, okay, I'm going to fill it up with something else or with nothing rather. So I left those spaces as an empty space or an empty cutout just lying there for the meantime and went along with doing the same for all the other insets or extrusions that I had. For the knobs, most of them are just basic cylinders that I extruded and created the shape out from. But for this particular one on the screen, it was a little bit tricky, so I had to use the subdivision workflow to work on it. So it ended up becoming one of the most dense mesh I had after I ended up working on this project. I tried reducing the density of the mesh, but I ended up considering sacrificing the form of the assets for that. So I just decided to give it I think it's about 2000 polygons, which is actually a bit high on the part of that mesh, but yeah. Okay. Um, so at this point of the modeling process, I was done with most of the major parts of this machine, and what was left were just the little additions here and there that would have been needed to complete the model and make it look more alive. So I just had to spend time going into each of them one by one. I ended up duplicating most of them and just using them as is, but yeah, modeling the smaller details took most of my time, which in the 3D modeling space actually is one of the most tasking parts, but in the end, it's also what sells your 3D model, the details and the texturing stage. I guess that's why a lot of people love sculpting. Though I use them in my workflow. I use sculpting in my workflow, but a lot of the time it feels quite daunting to sculpt, especially when you're sculpting from nothing. But as annoying as this point in the 3D modeling process is, it's actually also quite rewarding because once you get to this point in your modeling process, the main shape and everything is already there. So whatever you're adding, most likely is going to have an immediate visual effect or an immediate visual how do I put this, outcome on your scene. So as you're fixing it in, you're going to be seeing just how much is improving what you already have going on in your workspace. Plus the fact that for me it was quite helpful in this model I'm working on because most of the parts were repeatable or reusable, so I could just duplicate them across and um, delete the parts I didn't need and just leave what I wanted to work with. Kind of like those screws I fixed in earlier and the knobs as I mentioned earlier. So Okay, so as at this point, I was done with basically everything. All that was left was to get into the fine details like adding bevels and stuff. As you can see, I ended up parenting the whole um, individual pieces into my empty day or my helpers, way I would call it, and just viewing it in my scene to see how it looks with the rest of the environment combined. And I think, yeah, from the next process, we're going to go into adding the bevels and optimizing the mesh for um, the final export. Yeah, I began to ask myself questions like, will this look good if I put a bevel here? Or will this work if I leave this bevel here? Or if I leave this part of this mesh here? So I began asking myself questions like that. And I didn't try to bevel manually because that would have been very destructive. So instead I decided to use the bevel modifier. And even at that, I didn't just use it bare like that. I decided to use bevel widths instead so that I could have one bevel modifier, but by having bevel widths I can give different edges, different kinds of weight levels rather. So it would the same bevel will affect different edges in different ways. So I ended up having to fill in the bottom, fill in the top, even though I won't see those parts of the mesh because I would have needed bevels there. And I mentioned earlier, I had to also remove all those other extra parts of the mesh like the vents so that I won't have to run into issues when beveling becomes when I bevel because I would then have to um, start thinking about how to optimize the mesh. I didn't want to have too much faces on those plain parts of the mesh there because I mean it's not contributing to the geometry in any way apart from joining the extrusions to the main mesh. So I just decided to separate them at once. And frankly, I should mention this part took about an hour and a half or almost 2 hours out from the time I spent working on this mesh. So like I said, the detailing and optimization stage in the 3D modeling process is actually what takes most of the time, not even the block out or other stages. Okay, I should also mention this in advance, but I won't be creating the UVs for this mesh right now in this video. I'll probably do it in a future video, but for now I'm just showing my modeling process. The UV and texturing that's going to come at a later point. Since I've not begun texturing the rest of the environment I'm working on, right now it's just the individual environment props that make up the environment. Once I build the scene and I'm happy with it, then I'm gonna get into texturing of everything at once, including the air conditioner I made in the previous video. If you've not seen that video, you can also click the link that's gonna be given at the end of the video, and it should take you over there. Anyways, I'm gonna leave you to enjoy the rest of the video in peace, and I'll see you in the next video we'll have. So don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. Also hit the notification button so that you can be notified when the next video drops. In that video, we're going to be working on the lightings for the lighting points for the fire station environment. So I'll see you guys next time.